Good day, everyone, and welcome. I'm Pam Morgan with Applitools, and I'd like to welcome you to today's live workshop, Cross-Browser Testing with Cypress with Andrew Knight. Andy Knight is the automation panda and a developer advocate here at Applitools. Over the past decade, he's designed and built robust test automation projects from the ground up that can run thousands of tests continuously. He's the author of the upcoming book, The Way to Test Software from Manning Publications, and he's also the lead developer for Boa Constrictor, the .NET screenplay pattern. All right, Andy, it's all yours.
Cool, thank you, Pam. And hello, everyone. She said I'm Andy Knight. I'm the Automation Panda. It's nice to be here today. I'd also like to say Happy Lunar New Year. 新年快乐，虎年好. If you celebrate that like we do at my household, awesome. Hope it's a good one. So today I'm going to be sharing how to do modern cross-browser testing with Cypress. Cypress being a very, very popular front-end, end-to-end web UI test automation framework in JavaScript. Little disclaimer here, I'm actually new to Cypress. This was my first big foray into learning Cypress and being hands-on with it the first time. This is pretty cool. It's not too hard to pick up if you already know how to do test automation. So today's agenda, if I may share it. Our workshop today is going to be split primarily into two parts. The first part, we're going to look at traditional cross-browser testing with Cypress. And when I say cross-browser testing, I mean taking the same tests and running them on different browser configurations to try to eke out any differences that might happen, any of those bugs that might linger. We're going to take a traditional approach, just code up a standard Cypress test, hit a demo site, and nothing fancy there. But we're going to also identify some of the weaknesses in the traditional approach. Then in the second half of our webinar, we're going to take a modern approach to cross-browser testing. We're going to do so using Applitools, the Visual AI, the Eyes SDK, as well as the ultrafast grid. And we're going to see how we can run these, or how we can convert our test into an automated visual test that will actually be simpler than the traditional test. And then take that and run it on all these different browser configurations, even ones that aren't supported by Cypress by default. So let us start off with a demo app that we'll be testing today. I'm going to share my screen. Please bear with me. Okay. What we'll be showing today, or what we'll be testing today, is a basic login for a bank site. This is a demo app. You can get it at demoappletools.com. Anyone can hit it. But basically, I wanted to test that most people are going to be familiar with. Almost any application that any team has to test has some sort of like login field or some sort of checkout field. So we're just going to keep it simple so that y'all can do so easily. So here we go with our demo banking app. Front page is a login page. We can enter any username and password, hit the login button, and what we should expect to see upon login is that the main page is displayed. And it's going to have all kinds of typical banking stuff. You know, different account types, or you're looking for credit cards, debit cards, loans, mortgages. It'll have a warning message for when your nearest branch closes, different transactions with different amounts. So fairly typical, but still rich demo site. If we wanted to automate a test for this, it's really 4 steps. You would load the login page, make sure everything appears on the login page properly, then perform login, and then once the main page appears, verify everything appears here as well. Again, nothing too fancy. The only hitch that we have is that we actually have 2 versions of our demo site. Take a careful look at this login page. Note the blue ball here, the colors, the wordings of the buttons, versus our second version. I'm going to click these back and forth a few times. Notice how there are just some slight visual differences. Hold on to that thought. We'll come back to that later. We'll focus primarily upon the main version here. So with our demo site, let's automate this 4-step login test that we have in Cypress. So I'm going to flip over to the code here. As I said, I'm new to Cypress. I've done JavaScript before, but this is the first time I've used Cypress here. It honestly wasn't too hard to figure out. So if you're new to Cypress, don't feel intimidated. I created a project, and I used NPM to set it up. I'm using Visual Studio Code as my editor. It comes with all the good JavaScript completion stuff. And when you initialize a Cypress project using npx Cypress open for the first time, it'll create this project structure for you. So the typical project structure of Cypress is you're going to have a Cypress directory. Your integration folder is going to have your test cases. And in fact, when you first set up a Cypress project, it fills it with a bunch of examples. I've wiped those out because we don't need those. And so then in there, you're going to write your test cases as spec.js files. They're going to be raw JavaScript. I'm not doing anything fancy with TypeScript for this. But it is common practice in the JavaScript world that you name your test cases as spec.js. Why specification? Specification by example, focusing on behaviors. Right, beautiful. Okay, so the login test I have is written in traditional spec.js in this file here. Also, you can get all the example code from, or that I'm going to show today from the GitHub repository. I believe there's a GitHub link. I also put a link to the repo in the chat, so you can follow along with the code as we go. If you want to do that, if you want to check it out later, run it, full instructions, knock your socks off. Or if you missed the webinar or have somebody who missed the webinar, share that repo. Workshop.md has the entire thing there that you can follow. So here's what this traditional spec.js looks like for our login test. At the top, we want to put this references thing to denote, hey, this is a Cypress test. Then our test case is here. If you are completely new to JavaScript and everything, you should still be able to read this. It's fairly intuitive. Cypress is a full-fledged end-to-end test automation framework. And so it has a lot of batteries included, you could say. Its core test framework is Mocha. Mocha is one of the biggest test frameworks in the JavaScript land. It's really nice because it's very flexible. It focuses primarily upon the structuring of tests and the running, the execution. But everything else you kind of plug into Mocha. And so Cypress just kind of picks it up and uses Mocha internally as like, okay, this is how you're going to specify your tests. And in Mocha, it's very similar to Jasmine if you use that as well in JavaScript. But in Mocha, you will define a test by using this describe function. You'll say describe, and then you pop in a string that describes the test. Or I should say possibly describes the feature or describes the thing under test. So here I'm putting in a traditional test. This is our traditional login test, as opposed to in part 2, we'll do a visual one. Then the body of this is going to be the actual test case. Now, this is where the automation comes into play. The test case name is going to be should log into the demo app. And that's defined by an it call because you're describing it. Go figure. This is the Lego. It's very common. We roll with it. It's kind of cute, right? So describing a traditional test. It should log into the demo app. Demo app we just saw. So then in the body of this, I have our 4 steps that we coded, or the 4 steps that we described for the login. Loading the login page, verifying the login page, performing login, and then verifying the main page, right? 4 steps. I also have this before each clause here. This is basically saying, hey, before each of these its, meaning the test, I want to make sure that we're setting a certain viewport size for our browser. That's it. I just want to make sure it's big enough. But here, this is the first look we have at a Cypress call. So I'm saying, anytime we want to call Cypress in this test, we say cy or cy. cy.viewport. Viewport is the method for the Cypress object. And I'm saying I want a 1600 by 1200 window. Cool. Now you might be wondering, where does this come from? This seems like magic. It is. You don't have to set up a Cypress object like you would have to set up a Selenium WebDriver object. There's no like other before each behind the scenes where the Cypress thing is getting set up that you have to code. It's basically given to you. As long as you've got the Cypress package installed from npm when you set up, npm install Cypress, and then you put this references thing at the top, you're going to be able to just access the Cypress object and start making calls to it, and in Visual Studio Code have the autocomplete to it. So it's pretty cool. So like I can show cy dot, if I want to click something or I want to get the clock. So that's how we can get that. It's pretty cool. I saw that a lot of people in this webinar are new to Cypress, so I just want to kind of step through things so there's nobody tripping over anything. Again, I'm new to this too. I think this is really cool, right? So concise, so easy. Anyway, moving on. So each of these 4 steps I wrote as a helper function. We scroll down. In the same file, I have functions defined for each. So step 1, loading the login page. That's a CY visit call. This is equivalent to like, Selenium WebDriver.get. Basically what it does is it will load this page in the browser. Now, as I said before, we actually have 2 versions of our demo site that we're going to flip-flop between in a little bit. What we're going to do to control that flip-flop, we're going to have a Cypress environment variable that we can pass in. And we're either going to have the original site or the changed site that we can test. And so the original site's URL is just this. If it's not original, if it's the changed site, we're going to add on that extra piece of the URL. So just note that this is just this whole, oops, sorry, hit the scroll wheel. This selection is literally just picking between, do you want the original site or the demos or the changed demo site? So the next function we have is to verify the login page. Verify it loaded, make sure the elements appeared correctly. And so what I've done here in Cypress is just say, hey, cy.get the element by a selector. You don't have to get the element and then get something, or find the element and get something from it later. You can just say like, hey, get me this element. By default, Cypress uses CSS selectors. It's a simplification. It's their opinionated design. Just roll with it. I kind of miss XPath myself, but not my place. Right. So here, there were 5 elements we wanted to check. So for each one, I'm saying get the element and then add on a check, an assertion. So Cypress uses chai assertions. You can look up chai.js. There's a whole bunch of different kinds of things you can check with Cy. And I believe Cypress even adds its own custom ones. That detail's a little fuzzy to me. Don't quote that on me. But basically, if you want to check that an element exists in Cypress, you would say cy.get the element, and then you append the assertion. It should be visible. That's all we're checking for this. I just want to make sure they appear on the page. And we're going to check things like the logo, username, password inputs, login button, and then the remember me field. Third function, to perform the login. Again, this is very concise. To perform a login, we enter username, enter password, click login button. So here, again, we're using cy.get to get those elements based on selectors. If I want to type something into an input field, the method name is type. Putting in Andy and I heart pandas as the password. And then you want to click the login button once that's done. Excuse me. Final function is to verify the main page. And this one is a bit of a doozy. So that main page, as we saw, was quite something. There's a lot of stuff going on this page. They're order of magnitude, probably about 100 different elements just on the page alone that might be worth considering. So what I put in the code here is, first of all, let's just make sure a whole bunch of important elements are important, or a whole bunch of important elements are displayed. Again, using our cy.get with selector should be visible. Things like the logo, the search bar, menus. Now, there's also a different way you can get elements in Cypress. You can get an element using a CSS selector, and that uses the get method like this. But you can also get an element based on the text it contains. So here, I'm looking for elements that have the add account text or the make payment text. And we use the sci.contains method to get those. Slightly different way of selecting, so different method. In addition to just making sure certain things appear, there are specific values that we could check. So things like that time banner at the top, where it says your nearest branch closes in such and such minutes. What we can do is we can do a regular expression check on the text of that element. We could also check things like menu names. So if we recall on the left-hand side, there was that list of different account types. And so what we can do is we can say, hey, Cypress, get that list of elements, and I want to perform assertions on the different items in that list. So, item 0 should contain this text, item 1 should contain this text. That's another way we can do assertions. And finally, checking the transaction statuses of everything in our list, of all the transactions we've done. So there's 3 statuses: complete, pending, declined. We can do some funny thing where, again, we can get a list of elements in Cypress, and then for each one, form a check to make sure that the list of statuses includes whatever that particular element's status text is. So, ta-da! We have our basic Cypress test. Pretty straightforward, fairly concise. We're not even at 100 lines. I deliberately did not use page object model or screenplay pattern here. I just wanted raw Cypress calls to keep things, the code-wise, simple and all-in-one self-contained file here. Really, the most complicated thing in this test would be the assertions being checked, right? The second step doesn't have too much going on, but this fourth one, there's quite a bit of logic. And so the heft of automating this test was here in this. And note, we didn't even check everything, right? There are other things on that page, if I can show it again, that we never checked. We didn't check, colors of anything, placement of anything. We didn't check these banners here at the top. We didn't check other fields for the transactions. We could, but we would spend a lot more time automating those. Just note that as well. Our assertions were decent, but not totally thorough or comprehensive. All right. So let's run this Cypress test here. So to run tests in Cypress, I'm going to open up the terminal here. Oops, I already have the terminal. Cool. So if we want to run tests locally in Cypress, what we can do is we can say npx Cypress open. And what that will do is it should open up a Cypress browser. It's going to take a few seconds here. Well, I've got an update coming. That's cool. Alrighty. And so here is the Cypress window for launching your tests. Note, you can also run it from the command line purely instead of having this window pop up if you do an npx Cypress run. I'm showing this just because we're in developer mode, right, where we want to be able to see and click and run. That's one of the advantages of Cypress. It's very good for your front-end workflow if you're, say, a JavaScript front-end developer. Looking at this window, here's where we can start doing our cross-browser testing. Locally, these are the different browsers I have installed. I have Chrome, Firefox, Edge, and Electron. Cypress will scan your local machine to see what browsers you have available. And so, yeah, we can choose any one we want. Let's just say Chrome for now. Then I can click my traditional test, and it's going to pop up another window in Chrome. Tests are loading, and it's actually going to run this in real time. It's doing the loading. You can see it typing it out, loads the page. And success! Cool. Test passed. The other nice thing about Cypress is not only do you see it in the window, but if you hover over each of the steps on the left bar, you can see the test or you can see the browser stepping through each step of that test along the way, which is really nice, and highlighting the elements it's currently interacting with. So again, these are one of the nice things about Cypress versus something like Selenium WebDriver. So that was running in Chrome. If I want to run in Firefox, oops, let's stop that. I can just come back here and say, hey, switch the browser, let's run it again. And now this time it should run in Firefox. Boom. There it goes, clearly different visual there. And it's going, same thing. And it should pass. Very, very cool. Cool. So, pardon me. That's all well and good. So we can do cross-browser testing on our local machine, right? Well, not exactly. Well, I shouldn't say not exactly. We can. We can test Chrome, Firefox, Edge, or Electron, just as I've shown here. But if you've been astute in noticing, I'm on a Mac, right? You could probably tell by the little thing up here in the window, right? I'm on Mac OS. I got one of those new M1 chips. Oh my goodness, they're so awesome. I love it. I'm not here to gush about Apple products or anything. The reason I'm bringing up that I'm on Mac is because that means I have Safari. So why doesn't Safari appear in this list? It's one of the local browsers. Unfortunately, Cypress natively does not support testing against Safari. It also doesn't support Internet Explorer. It also doesn't support mobile browsers. The 4 browsers it supports are Chrome, Firefox, Edge, and Electron. So if you want to do real cross-browser testing, you aren't going to be able to do it all on a local machine with Cypress. That's one of the limitations Cypress has. You've got a certain set of browsers opinionatedly selected for you if you're doing local testing. So unfortunately, if you really want to test on mobile, or you really want to test on Safari, or you got an old legacy app that still needs to support Internet Explorer, hey, it happens. Sorry, Cypress can't do it for you. Another frustrating thing with local testing, and it's not just a problem with Cypress, but it's a problem with basically any kind of local testing, whether you're using Cypress, Selenium WebDriver, or Playwright, Nightwatch, WebDriver, it doesn't matter. You can only really have one browser version at a time on any given machine, unless you do some really, really weird hacky things. And so here, as you saw in my window before, I had Chrome 97. I had Firefox 95. I didn't have previous versions 1 or 2 back. And so if you were doing testing and you needed to be compatible for previous versions, again, you can't do that locally, at least not easily. You'd have to really do some jury-rigging of things. Another frustrating problem is when you test locally, you have an upper limit to how much you can test at a time. Even with these awesome new machines we have today, whether you're on an Apple M1 laptop or you've got some really souped up HP or Dell Windows box or you built it yourself, whatever, individual machines have limits. And so there's only so many tests that you can crunch at a time, let's say in parallel. I found that, anecdotally, you can successfully run about 1 test in parallel per processor or processing core on a machine before you hit, very sharp diminishing returns. And so if you have a very, very large test suite, let's say 1,000 tests, 5,000 tests, 10,000 tests, hey, it happens. We scale large sometimes. You really need to be running them in parallel if you're ever going to really run them continuously, because tests are long, or I should say web UI tests are slow, not necessarily long, but they are slow compared to unit tests. Order of magnitude in the industry, what we see as a web UI test takes about a minute, versus a unit test takes about a millisecond. Big difference there. And so if you've got 1,000 web UI tests that take a minute each, that's a really long time. That's more than half a day. It's what, like 17 hours or something? If you're not running in parallel, you're not going to get your testing done. And so on one machine, you can only run a limited number in parallel, which you have trade-offs. And finally, like I said before, with Cypress, you can't really test mobile devices locally, right? Cypress, you can do some viewport emulation tricks, but you can't really test mobile. Sorry. So how can you then do full-fledged cross-browser testing with Cypress if we have all these local limitations? Well, Cypress actually provides you the tooling to do this, but you kind of got to do it yourself. You can go on the Cypress doc site, and you can look up their articles on parallelization and cross-browser testing. And essentially, if you register an account with them and set up a Cypress dashboard on their website, you can also set up your own virtual machines, have it all pointed in, and basically make your own testing grid where Cypress will parallelize or will run your tests in parallel across the machinery that you give it, and then it all kind of aggregates results together and gives that to you. And you can see, I took this diagram directly from the Cypress docs. Without parallelization versus with parallelization, your tests are going to run a whole lot faster if you run them in parallel. Yes, awesome. So you can do this. This is really cool. But the problem is you have to do this, right? You have to set up this grid. You are going to be responsible for the infrastructure behind it. And that can be a bit of a drag because what you want to focus on is testing and moreover quality. You want to make sure that your application is good, right? So you do testing as almost like this necessary evil. And so you want to spend, you want to get the most bang for your buck when it comes to testing. You probably don't want to spend a lot of your time there. You probably want to spend more of your time developing. And so any extra work that you have to do to set up for testing is kind of a drag, right? And that's why teams hire entire people to do this, or organizations hire entire teams to do this, because there's a lot of work here. So setting up your own grid is work, right? I've done something similar. I haven't done this with Cypress, but I have set up a Selenium grid with Selenium WebDriver. And boy, let me tell you what, that was work. It was great because we could run our tests really, really fast. We got up to a scale of up to 100 tests in parallel at a previous job I worked. But there were times when that grid needed updates, right? Oh, new version of Chrome came out. Let me go in and update. Or it would sometimes arbitrarily crash. And it was really hard to figure out why. Sometimes it was just basically like, nope, we crashed, we failed, we can't serve any more sessions. No helpful error messages. All we could do is reboot and retry. Sucks, right? Or sometimes certain nodes in the cluster will just kind of freeze, and those tests will all fail while others are passing. So it can be a big hassle, a big headache, and a big time suck trying to maintain your own grid. I liken it to maintaining something like a classic vehicle, right? You're going to have to constantly be doing the upkeep and maintenance on it yourself. So you can do that if you've budgeted for that, but just note what you're getting into. So alternatively, if you don't want to if you don't want to set up your own grid, but you still want to kind of scale out your cross-browser testing, what's another way you can do it? Well, you can pay for a third-party vendor to provide you sessions as a service, basically. There are many companies out there. You probably already know the names, things like folks like Sauce Labs, Browser Stack, Lambda Test, so on and so forth, that will say, hey, you want to run your Cypress tests on any of these configurations, but you don't want to maintain your own grid. Get accounts from us. pay us a fee and we'll run it in our cloud for you. Basically, all you have to do is request it, you'll get a session, and then it runs. I believe a lot of the players in the space support Cypress now as well as Selenium WebDriver, which is really cool. So you can hook up to those services if you like. But do note that, pardon me, that's not necessarily it doesn't necessarily make it entirely better. You're trading one set of problems for another, right? You get the advantage of convenience, right? That it's there. You get the advantage that you don't have to maintain it yourself. You get the advantage that someone else is doing all those upgrades and doing all the security background stuff. But you still have to, pardon me, you still have this issue where it, how can I say this? One of the biggest issues that I found with platforms like that, and this, I'm not trying to throw egg at anybody, it's just kind of nature of it. They tend to be slower than either running locally or a fine-tuned do-it-yourself infrastructure. I've used a lot of these folks. I've run tests in different languages against these different platforms. And anecdotally, what I found is that my tests run about 2 to 4 times slower in a vendor's cloud environment than in my own. And that's just due to things like network latency, travel to and from, the fact that they've got to have set up and tear down on their side of things. It's the nature of the beast. So it's something that you have to face. If you want that convenience, you pay in terms of speed. You also pay. Do-it-yourself infrastructure that could be free aside from the cloud compute you pay for. But when you've got these vendor services, they might have free tiers, but then they're also going to have other tiers that you have to pay for as well. So that's a consideration. You pay one way or the other. So you had trade-offs. You have trade-offs. And so that's why I would argue traditional cross-browser testing is somewhat broken, right? Because there are still big challenges here yet to be solved. And like I said, you're always facing these trade-offs. So what do we do about this? I think it's time we rethink how we approach cross-browser testing. And specifically, ask, why do we do cross-browser testing? We do cross-browser testing because we want to make sure that our web application under test runs and renders correctly across different browser configurations, which could be different combinations of browser types, operating systems, versions, and viewport sizes, right? And also, if we're getting into the mobile space, devices, right? iPhone versus Nexus versus Android, or all the Android platforms, you know what I mean? But the main problem that we face in all these different platforms is not whether or not, or it's typically not if the app is going to run correctly in terms of its interactions, right? Almost all browsers now are standardized on JavaScript. So the same JavaScript is going to work the same mostly anywhere. The problem is what happens when you render, right? Responsive web design. That's where a big issue is. Because what could happen are visual oopsies like this, right? Where when you have a different rendering size, something lays over top of something else. Here's another example from Yelp, right? Again, text fields over text fields because responsive web app design did not appropriately shift. You can see this on mobile platforms as well here. So here's like Instagram. Oof, it happens, right? So if we really care about the visuals, the rendering of things, and not so much just cranking through all the different steps of the test, then we can eke out some interesting advantage here, right? Instead of trying to run a test full-fledged from end to end in every single browser configuration, which in and of itself is a combinatorial nightmare. What if instead we take a visual approach where we capture snapshots of the screens that we want and simply render those in the different browser combinations? right? That would be arguably a much faster process, right? A much more stable process, a much more reliable process. And that's exactly what Applitools offers. So here's how it works. First, what you would do is you would need to convert your test case to a visual test case. And what we mean by that is, let's say we take our login test, right? Login test had 4 steps. Take an interaction, verify things on the page, do another interaction, verify things on the page, right? The verification of the things on the page was making sure things were rendered correctly, right? So instead of having a ton of assertions for checking things on the page, what if we just went snapshot and captured that whole page visually for what it is? And when we say snapshot, I'm not talking just a pixelated screenshot. I'm talking we're capturing the DOM. We're capturing the skeleton and the muscles and the tissues in the page, the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Capture that whole thing in one snapshot, right? And render that visually, again, in different browser combinations. So we take that page, we could render it in Chrome. We could render it in Firefox, right? First time we run our test, we would capture a baseline image. That's the starting point. That's the good point. Then every time we run our test after that, we capture snapshots of the same pages. Then with the new snapshots, we can compare the new snapshot to the baseline via visual diff. That's what Applitools Eyes does. It's inspecting visual differences like that, looking for differences that human eyes would detect. So that means if your thing is like 1 pixel off, human eyes won't detect that. That's not significant. So Applitools Eyes isn't going to worry about that. But if you're missing a button, or like the button changed in size, or changed color, or moved somewhere on a page, it'll detect that. And in the Applitools dashboard, it'll put them side by side and actually highlight in purple, or pinkish purple, magenta-ish, where those differences happen. So it's focusing on the critical differences to kind of cut down on noise. That's the beauty of visual AI. It's AI-backed visual differentiation. So we can do that kind of visual testing. And then, like I said, because it's a snapshot, you can specify all the different kinds of browser configs you want. And they won't run locally on your machine. You take the snapshot once on your local machine from running the test through one time, and then you upload that snapshot to the Applitools cloud. And in Applitools ultrafast grid, it'll take that snapshot and render it in all the configurations you specify. So if you want to do Chrome, you can do Chrome. Then you can do Firefox. Then you can do Edge. And because you're now off of your local machine, even if your test was a Cypress test, you can render it in Safari. You can render it in IE. You can render it on any mobile platform you want. Why? Because it's just a snapshot. You ran a Cypress test one time on your local machine to capture the snapshot, but then you uploaded the snapshot and just re-rendered it in all the different places. And that's how you can do high scale, high parallel, modern cross-browser testing when you take a visual testing approach. So let's see how this works. We're going to revisit our test case, and we're going to update it with visual testing using Applitools. So to do this, you will need to have an Applitools account. Applitools register. So you can just Google Applitools register, just like I did, and you can come to the Applitools page, and you can register an account for free. You don't need to pay. You don't need to put your credit card in or anything. You can just sign up here, get your account. There's limits to what you can do with a free account, but you can run this workshop in its entirety on a free account, just to give it a try. So definitely do that. Once you sign up for an account, you will get what's called an API key. That's going to be your magic key, for lack of a better term, gigantic hash that goes off the page, right? That every time you run your test, you use that key to connect to your Applitools account in the cloud. So that way they know it's your tests and not my tests or someone else's tests. So you get your key first. Then what you're going to have to do in your project is you're going to have to install the Applitools Eyes SDK for Cypress. And so the command to do that is npm install. Oh, shoot, I need to share my screen. I'm sorry. Let's share my screen again. Live presentations, this is what goes on. Flying by the seat of our pants here. I prepared, I promise. Okay, so I've got my Visual Studio Code terminal back up here. And so in the terminal, if you want to install the Cypress SDK, or sorry, the Applitools Eyes SDK for Cypress, npm install at applitools /eyes-cypress. Now, I've already installed this, so I'm not going to run this command again, but that's what you would do. And then after the package installs, you need to set it up. So you'd say npx eyes-setup. npx meaning execute something from a module. And so this will add some things to your Cypress test project. It adds things to like the plugin and support. You can see in my index.js, it's requiring the Applitools Cypress SDK, and it's also adding some, oops, where is it? It's adding some commands and stuff too, so that you can use it seamlessly. So again, I've already done that, so I'm not going to run that. Alrighty, so once you've installed the Eyes SDK, let's go back to our test and make some changes. I have created a separate test case file called visual spec.js so that I can preserve both back and forth. But I mean, if you already had tests, you could probably just go retrofit what I'm about to show you. So again, at the top, we've got a Cypress test. The Mocha test case is pretty much the same. It's still a visual test. I've renamed it now. You should log into the demo app. So the first thing we need to do when we have a test case that's going to be doing visual snapshots is I need to open its eyes, right? Eyes SDK sees things like human eyes. Oh, clever naming of the tool, right? So we're going to open eyes, sci.eyesOpen. And we're going to give it the application name, Applitools demo app, and we're also going to give it a test case name. These names will appear in the Applitools dashboard with all of our test results. So give them good names that you'll be able to recognize. Other than that, our test steps are all the same, right? Still the 4 same steps. We're not changing the behavior we're checking. We're just changing the way in which we verify behavior. Important to note. Then after the test is done, we want to make sure we close our eyes. We open our eyes and we close our eyes. That tells Applitools, hey, this test is done. Boom. Then let's take a look at the helper functions, the implementations here. So the interaction functions are going to be the same. So loading the login page is the same, and performing the login, same Cypress calls, nothing different there. It's the verification functions that are going to be changed. So here in verify login page, previously we had a bunch of get element and should be visible calls, right? These things basically said appearance, yes or no. Didn't matter where it appeared on the page. Didn't matter what colors it was or what text it had. As long as an element by this selector appeared on the page, it passed, which is not necessarily good, right? Because if we go back and look at our demo app here, notice this icon, the 2 circles, right? That has an element name, right, with that selector. On the broken page, it has the same element, has the same selector to get it, but clearly this element is broken, right? The traditional test wouldn't catch a bug like that. I'm not sure how it would. I mean, what would you choose? But a visual test would catch that failure because it's doing a visual snapshot of the page. So instead of hard coding all these kinds of assertions, what the visual test does, it says, hey, Cypress, hey, my Applitools eyes, check the window. This is the call that makes a snapshot. We're going to call it the login page. It's going to capture the full window. It targets the window, capture the full window true. Same kind of thing for the verify main page. Remember in the previous test, we had a heckin' long set of assertions for verifying the main page. All that reduces to one snapshot call. Eyes check window. Now we're on the main page, window true. And I'm also going to be a little more custom. I'm going to say, hey, set my match level to layout. What that's doing is saying, hey, if there's some text that's different or there's some colors that are different, I don't care. Don't trip over those. I just want to make sure the structure of the elements and all are where they should be. So we can see how this visual test is actually a much simpler implementation, right? I could pop this out in about 10 seconds. Whereas if I were automating this could probably take me a good 10 minutes at least to find all the selectors and think about what I want to do. And this is more comprehensive because it doesn't just pinprick certain, or what's the word I'm looking for? It doesn't just pinpoint very specific things on the page. It captures the whole page. Something to keep in mind with visual testing. If a picture is worth 1,000 words, a snapshot's worth 1,000 assertions. Right here. Cool. So that is all we have to do to change our test to be a visual test. That's half the battle. The next thing we got to do is tell our Cypress tests against which browser configurations do you want to run. Remember, we're trying to do cross-browser testing. Testing just on Chrome ain't going to get the job done here. To do that, we need to create a new file in our project. In the root of our Cypress project, we're going to create this thing called Applitools config.js. Here it is. This is, again, very concise. What we're saying is, okay, I'm going to export these things. They're like settings, basically. Configuration, hence the name config.js. Ha! We're going to set a test concurrency of 5, meaning in the Applitools ultrafast grid, I'm going to run 5 snapshots at a time. That's my scale of parallel execution. If you have a free account, you'll probably need to set this to 1 because I think they limit you to that. My account, I get up to 5, so gosh darn it, I'm taking all 5. Also, remember that Applitools API key I mentioned before? When you register your account, you get that. You'll need to set that as an environment variable. So I already have it set in my environment. Echo Applitools API key, right? That is an environment variable. You could say, if you're in a Unix-based system or Mac OS, set env, or is that right? No, export, excuse me. Export variable name equals value. I'm not going to show you my API key because I don't want you using it. But just note, as long as you put it as an environment variable, Cypress tests and Applitools SDK will suck it in. We're just saying this is the thing that's named API key. So then you have the browsers. In this example, I have 5 desktop browsers: Chrome, Firefox, Edge, IE11, and Safari. Ooh, the forbidden browsers, right? And I've set them all to different viewport sizes. Also, cleverly, I have 5 different mobile platforms. And each one, different screen orientation. Am I portrait or landscape? All right? All right. Cool, cool. I've also given this test set a batch name, which is kind of like a test suite name, which again, this is so when your tests are uploaded to the Applitools dashboard, you can easily filter and search based on this name. So this is all we need to do to tell Cypress to, or rather I should say, to tell the Applitools SDK to run the snapshots on these different configurations. It's declarative, it's specification, example. Cool, cool. So let's run this visual test. So I'm going to run with the Cypress browser again. Give it just a moment to open up here. And locally, I'm going to choose to run on Chrome. and I'm going to say run the visual spec test. So now it should open up here, and it's going to run this test once on the local machine. Even though I specify those 10 browsers, locally it's only running once. So here it goes. So it's running. It's going to capture all those visual snapshots. Going, going, going. Cool. Alrighty. Now, if I switch to my Applitools dashboard, we can see that the Applitools ultrafast grid is running my snapshot tests. It takes about, when I've run this, it's taken me about half a minute to run all 10 of those. Each of those browser configurations, of which there are 10, has two different snapshots it's trying to check. It's trying to check the login page as well as the main page. And so we'll just wait for this to do its thing. And here we go, boom. So batch duration, half a minute. Half a minute for 10 cross-browser tests in a cloud platform? That's pretty fast. And you can see each one of these, it's the login test from the modern cross-browser batch. Each one is running a different browser, or a browser or device. So here we got the different mobile devices. And for desktop, we have the different browsers like Safari, IE11, Chrome, Edge, what have you. Now, notice the status here says new. This was the first time we ran, so that means Applitools is setting these as the baseline images. And we can open up and look at them. So here's the baseline image that was formed for the login page on this particular mobile platform, as well as the main page. That's what I'm looking for. So this was an iPad Pro. We could also look at what it looks like on, let's say, Safari, right? Boom. So you can tell the visuals are a bit different because this was, Safari desktop 800 by 60 or 600. That's that re-rendering of the snapshots. So let's run it again one more time. How do I... There we go. So if we run it again, it's going to rerun the test. Again, we should still be passing, right? Because we haven't changed anything. And now if we go back to our Applitools dashboard, it's running again. Doop, doop, doop. Again, should take about half a minute. This is live here. This is not video recording. This is not staged. This is running live. And so here now, one more refresh, that should pass. Okay, so now instead of saying new like they did in the first run, they all say passed. Why did they say passed? Well, if you do the comparison, the baseline image versus the new snapshot or the checkpoint, they're the same, right? No visual differences detected. Boom, everything is passing. Awesome. And that one took 38 seconds to do all 10 of these. Not bad. Not bad at all. What happens, though, if we introduce a visual bug, right? As I said, we have that second app that has some visual problems in it. Let's run the test doing those. So I'm going to close the Cypress browser windows here. And remember how we had that switch in the code between the original site and the changed site in that load login page here? Let's use that. So I'm actually going to run the I'm going to run the test from the command line. Also, if you're new to JavaScript, something cool that you can do in the packages or in the package.json file, which comes with npm, there's a scripts setting, and you can set custom scripts to run using simpler commands. So what I want to do is I want to run with the changed site. So basically, this is the thing I want to run here. So I can say, and actually, let me just do it this way. npm run test.changed. So what this will do, it'll actually run our traditional test as well as our visual test against that new changed demo site. Now, the traditional test is not going to do anything with Applitools or visual testing. It's just going to be straight visual test. And even though that site will be different, the test will still pass. But the visual test should detect the changes and show that in the dashboard. Let's see that happen. So this will take probably, about a minute or so to run. And I can make that a little bigger. So it's running the traditional test. We should see that pass in just a moment. Yep, oh, it's passing even though we know there were problems. Ooh, false positive in your test cases. That does not make you feel good. Ouch. So let's see what the visual test does. In fact, like I said, like we did before, I'm sure if we refresh here, we should start to see it. Oh, still needs a moment. Still going. Let's try again. Refresh. There it is. Cool. So it's still running. Still got 3 of them left. Cool. Well, what we can see is that while it's still going, the first results have come in. And now instead of being green and passed, they're orange and unresolved. What does that mean? Well, you as the human will need to come in and check to see, okay, we detected a difference. Is it good or bad? And it's not just any old difference. This is something rather significant. So they've all finished now. Yep. So if I just pick one here, and again, that took about half a minute to do all these. When I open up for visual differences, you can see, oh, wow. In magenta, you're seeing the highlighting of what is different between these two. So the icon is different, and the sign-in button is different, and the remember me thing shifted, and that's different. So now me as the tester, I decide, was this an okay difference, or is this a failure, right? Because it's the human that's going to decide that. If it were an okay thing, I would hit the thumbs up here, and the new image would become the new baseline. However, to me, this is a failure. This is very bad, right? It broke. So I'm going to say thumbs down. Then the Applitools dashboard will forward you to the next test to see, like, hey, okay, this one also failed. Thumbs down, thumbs down, thumbs down. I don't like any of these. This is all just bad. Okay. And so we have all of those now marked as failures. Oh. Modern cross-browser testing in a nutshell with visual AI and Applitools ultrafast grid. That's how you can do it. Other cool thing I can say, right now I was showing how I was running them from my local machine. You can also run them from any CI system. In fact, if you go to the GitHub repository, let me get to it from here. One moment. I gotta get there. Workshop. There we go. So here is the repository in GitHub. If you go to Actions, I've actually created 2 GitHub actions that will run the visual test in Applitools ultrafast grid for both the original app as well as the changed app. So if you want to look at what those workflows look like, you can go into the code. Actually, let me go to Visual Studio Code so it's a little bigger. GitHub workflows, and you can see exactly what the GitHub action looks like. Nothing fancy. This is I basically just took the Cypress action and boom. So I have my API key stored as a secret in my repository. You would need to do that in your repository if you wanted to do this kind of thing. But whether you run it on your local machine or you run it from a CI system, you can still run just one functional test and then do all of your visual comparisons in the Applitools cloud and capture those snapshots, render them on any browser, whether or not your tool, aka Cypress, supports those browsers or not. Pretty neat. So with that, that's the workshop. So we can open it up for Q&A if we have any time left.
Thank you, Andy. Lots of good questions today.
Hit me.
Okay, so let's go back to the beginning. Let's see what we've got here. So we had someone early on ask for get.contains. Are there any limits or weird limitations to that? Or so long as the text is attributed to the element, it should work?
Yes. I believe it's just if an element contains that text, like a get text kind of thing.
Okay. Alan wants to know his application under test features an iframe, which must be launched, and then he must test within it. Could Cypress manage that?
I'm not sure. Cypress iframe. I believe it can handle iframes. Yes.
Okay.
It looks like there's some difficulty with it, but it looks like Cypress can handle iframes.
Okay. Mark asked, how do you test UX things like heading levels for titles and fonts and text sizes?
Ooh. Can you repeat that question again one more time? Sorry, I was linking the article to the attendee chat.
Sure. Mark asked, how do you test UX things like heading levels for titles and fonts and text sizes?
Sure. So with the visual testing, right, it's capturing the whole snapshot of the page. So everything that visually appears, regardless of like the color, the size, the font, that's going to all become part of that baseline image and thus that visual comparison. So anytime that changes, you're going to, or Applitools Eyes is going to notice that and then notify you via an unresolved status of that particular test.
Okay. Sylvie asked, is there anything important to know about load testing and cross-browser testing?
Ooh, that's a great question. So I have a bit of nuance that I apply when I talk about load testing. When someone says load testing, what I frame that to mean is you're adding extra stress, extra traffic, extra load, whatever weight on the system under test that you have. So if it's something like a web app, that could mean you're firing off a bunch of different requests. Typically what you see with load testing is that the more load or stress you put on the system, the worse the system tends to perform, right? So if you start cranking through a whole bunch of requests onto a web app, then any old person who tries to go load the web application for themselves will probably find a slower experience when they try to load things or make requests on their own page. And so the way that I like to frame load testing is separating the tools that generate load on the system from the actual testing that is done. So how I could set that up, let's say for a web app, you may have a tool that generates a whole bunch of requests, right? And that's going to put stress on the system. Then I could run these functional tests or these visual tests against the web app and see what happens. And one of the things that I would be testing for from a functional standpoint is that even under a given amount of load or stress, that the test or that the behaviors in the app still functionally work, even if they're a little bit slower. So you could do that style of testing with cross-browser testing, right? The cross-browser nature of it probably doesn't matter as much at that point, right? Because what you're trying to focus on with going cross-browser is like, okay, well, what's the rendering difference between Chrome, Firefox, IE, Edge, Safari, mobile versus desktop, right? But I mean, if I don't know, I'm not sure that load on a system would trigger those kinds of differences. It may be a response time thing where it's like, okay, maybe Firefox is like a split second slower than Chrome, so if you put so much stress on the system, you're going to violate an SLA. Maybe something like that. I don't know.
Sounds like a topic for a whole nother webinar. Okay, we've got another question. For those who are brand new to a project with little to no test automation in place, will there be a benefit of just jumping straight to Applitools eyes to develop the visual tests as opposed to writing out the test only to translate them later?
Ooh, my answer to that is yes. I've actually thought about this. So many times teams are struggling to do test automation, right? Like if you look at a project like Cypress, right? Or I should say a tool like Cypress. You can bring that into an existing JavaScript front-end project, set it up, add it in there, write the test. Then you've got to take the time to learn how to use Cypress. That was last week for me. You've got to take the time to set up the project. You've got to take time to plan out your test cases. Then you've got to figure out like, oh, how do I take these plain language steps and smash them into code to get them running? And then you hope and pray it works. Like you hope you didn't get a selector wrong. You hope like that even if somebody changes something on the page, the thing is going to work, right? And so there's this high challenge with writing test automation. And people get burned on things like, oh, I didn't wait right, or oh, my selector was wrong, or I have some race condition somewhere. I really do think that the visual testing aspect of it can kind of simplify that. Because instead of having to spend a lot of time in your verification code, we saw those methods for the verifications that were like long. You saw that 1/4 step had just as much code as the other 3 combined, right? Instead of spending all the time to figure all that out and no, it's not comprehensive and no, it's not brittle, have a 1-line visual check in there. Just boom. That is going to save you development time. It's going to save you cognitive stress on yourself, right? And so you can say, well, I can fiddle with the interactions. That's pretty easy, right? And then do some quick little interactions. Boom, slap in the visual verification. It's going to make your automation a lot easier. And that could be a good starting point because 80-20 rule. Like if you can just get a basic smoke test in, runs like, a dozen tests that check the most basic things in your app. What's the most basic thing? Go to a page, take a snapshot. Does it look the same? That's the most basic thing. 80-20 value, 20% of the work, 80% of the value, right there, boom. Visual testing can just expedite you on that path. Absolutely.
Great. We have a question. Does Applitools use real devices for those mobile configs or emulators?
I believe right now it's emulators, like sophisticated emulators, not dumb ones. But I am pretty sure that coming soon, we're getting real devices, I think. I don't quote me on that. That's something we'd have to double check.
Check back. I have a couple of questions about baseline images. Corey and Santiago, let's see if I can roll these into one question. How do you get a new baseline snapshot if the page changes due to new development? And then Santiago says, yeah, basically the same thing.
Sure. Cool. So the easy way to do it is when you run that new test on the updated visual, Applitools dashboard will show, hey, unresolved for this snapshot. And you'll see the diff, you'll see the old one, you'll see the new one. And if you as the tester decide, yes, that's a good snapshot, this is a good change and I want to use this new snapshot, when you hit that thumbs up button, that new snapshot becomes the new baseline. It replaces the old one. So that way, when you run the test again, it'll be comparing it to that new baseline. The harder way would be if you wanted like a really hard reset, which I don't recommend. You can actually go into the Applitools dashboard and delete baselines. And so then the next time you run the test, it just automatically establishes a new baseline. So either one of those ways works.
Okay. got just a couple more. Let's see. So many good questions. Sunil says, what if my test suite has 1,000 test cases, and if there is a major change on my UI, so do I need to modify the baseline visuals manually? Are there any other way to achieve this faster?
That's a great question. So the thought of needing to change 1,000 baselines in one pass seems very daunting and might be something that dissuades you from taking a visual testing approach. But in reality, it may not shake out as bad as it seems, because excuse me, I would find it surprising if there is one visual change to an app that would affect every single test case in that suite. Right, more likely it's in a particular area or something, so it's going to be a subset of test cases. And if your tests are truly unique and your snapshots are truly unique, then that number should be fairly small, that you would just see maybe a couple that you would have to go in and be like, oh, here's a change, click new baseline. If it is something that is fairly cross-cutting, like let's say there's a banner across the top, right? And you have a Chinese New Year message that you send out, and all of a sudden now that's like, I don't know, messing up all your baselines. Maybe that's not a good example. Let's say it's like a permanent banner change, right? You changed the styling of it. You went from blue to green or something. And it does affect every single snapshot. That's kind of painful, yes. Hopefully your developers warned you about this ahead of time, so you had time to prepare. What you can do with the Eyes SDK, either in the code or from the dashboard level when you see the baselines, you can kind of customize how the visual checking happens. So you can do things like I showed with the layout on that second thing. Like do you want to ignore color and text and just check layout? You can set that as an option. Or you can set specific regions of the snapshot to say, hey, ignore this region. So maybe you just ignore the top region there. And if you want to check just that header, you can make a specific one-time snapshot check that checks that region instead of having it checked over and over again 1,000 times. So there's ways that you can mitigate the impact of cross-cutting visual changes. You just have to be careful and smart about it. That's all.
All right, great. There was also a question about doing sections, small sections of the screen as well. So you got two birds with one stone on that one. Ooh. All right. Thank you, everyone. That is really all the time we have for today. I very much appreciate you being here. We will send out a link to the recording tomorrow by the end of the business day, and we'll be sure to include a link to the repository there as well. Thank you, Andy, for a great workshop today.